Hey, welcome back to the monthly roundup for the Substack by Hollie McKay. Hollie, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Dennis.
Good. All right. So this month we're going to cover not all of the articles, but just a few of them. And we're going to start off with an article that you wrote on a disturbing subject, going back to what really was part of your formative entry into caring about human rights and that the situation in Sierra Leone many, many years ago. Tell us a little bit about what that
Yeah,
means
let
from
me
a
just
formative standpoint.
preface by saying my daughter is probably going to make a sound cameo, so just bear
I'm
with
looking
me.
forward to it.
Um,
Yeah, we're good.
Working mom life, yes. So anyway, for me, growing up, I think the story of Sierra Leone in the 90s was just something that really captivated me. And as I got older and really understood what was happening, and I think as someone who writes a lot about justice and accountability, what happened in Sierra Leone was just a whole other level of evil that I think we aren't really taught in schools, we don't really know of. And this was an incredibly brutal civil war, and one of the most horrific that I've ever read about or learned about. So there was a group called the RUF, and it would launch a rebellion against the government. And one of its very systematic tactics was amputating children. Some reports were as young as 8. Other journalists I know of that era said that some of the victims were babies. So part of this amputation, obviously, we know babies and children are very innocent and play no part in any of the fighting, but it was a very deliberate tactic for several reasons. Amputations, they serve as this really horrific method of instilling fear in communities and families. And so by attacking those who are seen as defenseless, the rebels really aim to crush that spirit of resistance and force communities into submission. Um, and then, so taking away the limbs wasn't just a fear tactic at that point. It also meant that they were permanently disabled for the rest of their life. So they could no longer work properly. They couldn't contribute to society, therefore hindering the entire economy and making reconstruction after the war even harder. So it could also be viewed as a very twisted form of communication, of warning people that if they were to stand up against them, what could happen. So, and really, at the end of the day, when it comes to Sierra Leone, very few people were held to account. A special court was established between the UN and Sierra Leone in 2002, and it was tasked with prosecuting these war crimes and the crimes against humanity. The former Liberian president, who was sort of part of fueling the conflict, he received an 80-year sentence for aiding and abetting the RUF. However, many of the other leaders and the people that were carrying out these orders, they never faced justice. And so essentially, the men who did this horrible act got away with it. And there's never, there's no talk about it. There's no real push to kind of change it. So that's something that I think it's important just to keep highlighting how this happens in the world and how horrible it is that those that have happened to have to bear the brunt of permanent disability and know that the evil still walks among them, essentially.
Yeah. So, and while in many cases, or in most cases, uh, in the years since then, the it's not as horrific. I mean, that's probably one of the most horrific cases out there, rivaling the wholesale murder of entire groups of people by, like Pol Pot and others. But the fact that there are people out there that believe that these calculations of cruelty are acceptable for achieving their aims continues to be out there, and people do still try to get away with whatever they can, and it's something that needs to be held to very vigilant account, as time goes on. Um, so speaking of that and time account, you also wrote an article about the Leahy Law, which is the U.S. response of linking military aid to human rights policies by the people that we support. And so you went over that in rather great detail in your article, starting with historical examples and then ending with the dilemmas surrounding the current war in but between Israel and Hamas. So tell us a little bit more about, what's behind that law and what the motivation for
Yeah,
writing
so
that article at this time.
The, the Leahy Law is something that's come up a lot in recent times, given everything happening in the Middle East, and of course the US involvement in supplying arms to Israel. So it's something I wanted to go over just because I think it's something sort of thrown around in the news, but I think most people kind of walking the streets probably don't quite understand what it is. So, in a nutshell, the Leahy Law, it was named after its sponsor, Senator Patrick Leahy, and it's really been the cornerstone of foreign policy since 1997, since it was sort of attached to a spending bill. And it attempts to link military assistance with human rights. So it essentially prohibits the US government from providing military training or equipment to foreign security forces that are considered to be involved in gross violations of human rights. Um, and this has kind of gone through quite a vetting process over the years. So before the US can offer the assistance, the State Department sort of works with the Department of Defense. They investigate what may happen in terms of human rights, the past. They look into extrajudicial killings, torture, rape, things that are very wildly war crimes. And then decisions can be made as to whether arms can or cannot be supplied by the US. So a few examples of this in action in Pakistan. In 2010, the Leahy Law was invoked to suspend aid to specific Pakistani army units over concerns of extrajudicial killings. And a lot of the evidence was provided by human rights organizations. So they're really the eyes and ears on the ground a lot of these times. And then again in Mexico, there were sort of similar concerns in Mexico in 2014. There was a disappearance and presumed massacre of 43 students. And that really brought international attention to the involvement of Mexican security forces in some of these human rights violations. And that led to increased scrutiny under the Leahy Law and a temporary suspension of aid to certain Mexican units. In Egypt after the 2013 military coup, and there were some very violent crackdowns on protesters. The US also temporarily suspended military aid to the country, and the Leahy Law certainly played a significant role in this. And then over time and most recently, the Israel-Hamas war. And so this is really one of the most contentious applications of the Leahy Law, pertains to the Israel being sort of the primary recipient of US military aid. So the situation is complicated because Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by the United States and other countries. So therefore, that designation in itself really influences the US stance on military support for Israel. But of course, what we see is a lot of horror and destruction that has ignited a lot of controversy over civilian deaths and whether this can be a case where the Leahy Law could and should be invoked.
Yeah. Well, so it's that civilian death factor that, continues to plague the world, particularly in high intensity conflicts, which the war in with Hamas has really turned into. Um and it's a bit of a quandary. What you're going after a terrorist organization, they're deeply embedded into the local population. You find targets, but the targets involve higher than normal collateral damage, and people around the world aren't used to that level of collateral damage. It's not like World War II where, we would bomb entire cities, right? It's just not something that the US or US allies are expected to do. That's for like bad people to do. And so it's quite the quandary. And it's not as bad as amputating children's limbs with machetes and stuff like that, but it's still a quandary. And yeah, I think there's a case to be made to say, it's a good thing we have
I think
laws
it's
like
awful
this.
what's happening. I don't think it's going to advance Israel or the United States are really advanced what they're trying to do and stamp out terrorism, it's certainly going to push it forward. And I think it's an important question that needs to be raised. Um,
I agree because these are terrorist organizations, as you know, from having worked around them and covering them for many years, are far more resilient than our simplistic solutions give them credit for. They can tend to hang around for generations as opposed to campaigns that last only a few years. So yeah, that it's definitely a good call to keep tracking this kind of stuff. Now, let's turn our attention to a little bit bigger picture on the international scene. Our dear friends in China, and their efforts trying to balance out what they want to do with their nuclear arsenal, which is a kind of an interesting quandary for them from the point of view of technological advancement being having to be balanced out with other factors. So you're a pretty good article covering all the different aspects of it. So, a quick summary and then your views.
Yeah, well, China, I mean, there's been a lot of attention paid to Russia, I think, in recent years about their nuclear arsenal. But what really hasn't received the same amount of attention is how China is really rapidly building and modernizing its nuclear arsenal at a very unprecedented pace. Just to give you an example, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists estimates that China now possesses about 500 nuclear warheads. A number of experts believe that will grow very quickly in the coming years. And in a 2023 Pentagon report, it highlights a very significant increase in China's operational nuclear weapons under Xi Jinping and projects an arsenal of over 1,000 warheads by 2030 and 1,500 by 2035. So that's a lot. And I think China's motivations remain a topic of very intense debate. Is this nuclear buildup part of a defensive modernization effort aimed at matching US levels, or does it signal a more aggressive posture on the world stage? So, what is it that China, I guess, is really trying to achieve? Um, Up until now, it was very much a minor player in the global nuclear arms race, very much lagging behind the US and the Soviet Union in Cold War times. But we're seeing that very much shift dramatically. And so, if you read the article, we really go through what this looks like for the United States, what this potentially looks like for Taiwan as well, and things that are happening in the South China Sea. So there is a lot at stake for the United States.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, so if the Chinese build up to 1,500 nuclear warheads in their arsenal, that would put them on par with the Russian and the American strategic nuclear arsenals, because we negotiated our nuclear arsenals down to about 1,500 strategic warheads apiece as part of the wind down of the Cold War. So that would essentially, by mid-century, make it so that there would be three powers with about equal strategic nuclear arsenals on planet Earth. And that will change the overall strategic equation of the planet by a lot in terms of spheres of influence and ability to, if not project power into lower level conflicts, certainly that we're going to have to um, oh, my best friend is now on
You've got a
camera.
lot to say about it.
Yeah, yeah.
You have a lot
So,
to say about
yeah,
China and
but
nuclear.
yeah, oh, well, of course, because she's an international expert in the making. And so, but yeah, I mean, by mid-century, if they keep up with this pace, that would be good. And also, the fact uh, the U.S. will be under a great deal of pressure to modernize our delivery systems because we have very good delivery systems, but they're with the Russians replacing all of their obsolete systems and the Chinese building new systems, we may wind up having the oldest arsenal around, and so I think you raise a very important question with this article that goes far deeper than the coverage of the Chinese itself to the question of what should the United States response be in terms of how modern our military nuclear arsenal has to be by 2050 stand off not just one peer enemy, but two at the same
Mm.
simultaneously. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely an important article that
It
continues
is,
the.
and I think we're at a sort of a time where there's sort of been a big push for countries to divest of their nuclear weapons, if you will, to destroy, to get rid of, and I think, yeah, I mean, the US could do that theoretically, but I highly doubt that Beijing or Moscow or anyone else would be doing that. So, um, unfortunately, in
Yeah,
this situation, that would put the US in a very defenseless spot, and
we
that's
don't want
the
to. Yeah,
unfortunate reality.
yeah. I don't think it's a good idea to be put into a catch-up position. So that's something that the next 2 to 3 U.S. administrations are really going to have to concentrate on. So yeah, it's an important topic to keep track of, much more than people realize. We tend to get a little bit complacent in America, thinking we're in better shape than we are on these types of things. Okay, so finally, and yeah, there we go. Look at those eyes going like, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I know. Total. Future analyst in the making. Um,
Hopefully,
last
maybe we
last
should go into something more happy.
yeah, well, let's do something into
We'll
something
see.
very happy. You have a new book out, and it is a book that I have been wanting to see published for a very long time, and that you have just published a novel.
I
Tell us
did.
about.
So yeah, just a reminder, The Dictator's Wife came out at the beginning of June, and um yeah, I'm very excited to have gotten this project out. It's been many years in the making. And it's kind of a compilation of many of the dictatorships that I've worked in, that I've researched and studied over the years, and I wanted to experiment with a little bit of a different format. So it is it's a fiction novel, but very much rooted in sort of a lot of reality that I hope will give people a deeper sort of psychological understanding of how these dictatorships work and the complexity of it. And I've published several excerpts in my Substack, and will continue to do so. But please get the book. It's available. It's also on Kindle, and all the links to all the different places, Target, Amazon. It can be found at Hollie, my name, HOLLIEMCKAY.com/books. And as always, thank you so much for your support. And I'd love to see your reviews, get your feedback. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, well, I'll give you my review on it. From the first time I ever saw the draft manuscript, I have been imploring you to get this thing published. So, because I think it is a really good book, and I highly recommend it to people to get and read, for because you see the non-journalism style of Hollie's writing on top of
Yeah,
it, which is pretty good,
absolutely.
pretty darn
First and
good.
foremost, a writer. I think before I'm a journalist, I'm a writer. Something I
Yeah.
love.
Okay. All right. All right. Before we get to doing too many highs on camera, thanks, Hollie, for this interview, and we'll talk to you again next month with another roundup.
Thank you, Dennis.
All right.